So we're at 12:30. We want to go ahead and start, Aaron?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Steve, we've got Steve online and Matt Watkins, Paul Boldo as committee members. Who else do we have? Sonia is with us, but Luis is not, right? Although we do want to take up his committee membership, even though he's not here. So
I can ping him. I know that he was scheduled to participate, so I can ping him to see if he'll be joining soon.
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And regardless, I think I haven't received any questions or concerns. So I think with that roll call and in the room here, if you folks can see, we have Sophie, Craig, and Chuck and Joe here. So we've got a quorum and I think we can move forward. So Steve, I'll turn it back over to you. And I apologize, we did not have time to get together with you. Do you have a copy of the agenda?
Yes. Because I figured you just left me in the lurch.
I'd like to do that often.
Create some additional excitement. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Aaron just went through the roll call. So why don't we go to the recap?
So,
Aaron, do you want to do committee member real quick?
Yeah, maybe we should do, under the roll call, the new committee member, Luis.
Yeah.
And we sent out Luis's application to you folks, and I have to apologize to Luis. We should have done this back in October, and I failed to get the application out to everybody, but Luis is following up with the seat that was filled by Self-Help Enterprises. Their previous member took a position at another organization. So Self-Help is asked to seat Luis. I haven't received any comments or concerns about his application, so we'll leave it to the committee. What we've done in the past is ask for a motion to add him as a member, and then we take a vote.
Move to add Luis as a member.
You have a second?
Second here.
Yep, we got a second by Joe.
Any opposed? Then it passes.
Great, so Luis is already committed. He doesn't even know it yet.
He was on there.
Oh, did he join? Great.
His
Luis,
picture came up for a second.
welcome to the committee officially. Apologize it took so long, but you're part of the committee now. So now we're going to put you to work. So you might regret it a little bit. But.
So now we'll do the recap.
Yeah, and Matthew, I don't know. Do you want me to cover the recap, or you want to? I think. Did you have it in your slide presentation?
Yeah, we can just do it very, very briefly. You can add anything that's left out. Craig, do you want to go down a couple slides? One more. Okay, so obviously we had in the September and October meetings, we had very, very productive meetings, actually moving from our guiding principles to decisions about specific strategies to be implemented in a phase 1 or version 1.0 water market this water year. Actually, can you go up? I think if you go up, there's one more just before this, Craig. So things that we discussed in those meetings were that we would try and implement a version 1.0, or we would try and craft a version 1.0 strategy that could get an up or down vote from each of the 3 GSAs. The strategy could be implemented this water year, which ends September 30th, 2023. That we would do monthly auctions and matching bids to purchase water with offers to sell water, and that we would at least do monthly auctions in the last 3 months of the water year, and that those auctions would be facilitated by a third party. We decided that any transfers that happen in that market, that price and quantity for information will be made available. So there will be the maximum amount of information about price and quantity, and that we would have specific strategies to mitigate adverse impacts. We discussed 2 specific triggers. One is the minimum threshold trigger, where if a particular analysis zone is to get dangerously close to its minimum threshold, that zone would drop out of a larger group of zones, and that directional restrictions on trading would apply. No additional allocation would be allowed to be transferred into that zone. We also talked about a disadvantaged community trigger, where if a small municipal well were to get dangerously close to the bottom, that would actually halt trading in the particular analysis zone that was affected until that impact is mitigated. You can go to the next slide, Craig. There are still some so other questions that we answered. We asked how will we handle the 30-day lag in water use data that's presented by the Land IQ data, and the committee decided that the existing fees and penalties will create the incentives necessary to induce participants to be forward-looking, and that there's already a system in place to handle situations where somebody exceeds their allocation, either through water use or through transfers. Transfers will be approved after being matched by the exchange platform by a submission of a transfer approval form to the GSA. We identified that there are some updates needed to the water accounting dashboard to support the water market if one were to be implemented this water year. Aaron is actually going to, some work was done with the engineering team after the last committee meeting to sort of refine what those needs are. And Aaron later this afternoon is going to talk about an innovation that we're proposing for the dashboard. In particular, the creation of a new bucket, a transfer bucket. And he'll give you more details about that. We also identified that we need location information, and that is in particular parcels by analysis zones. We've been working with the engineering team on updating the analysis zones, aligning the boundaries of those analysis zones with parcel boundaries and other jurisdictional boundaries. And Aaron might have something to say about that when we give you an update on the legal and engineering teams. There's still some outstanding questions regarding accounting rules. What water is debited first? Is it native or does a water user choose? These are already laid out in the allocation plan, but they need to be aligned with the water market rules. Can water purchased in the market that goes unused be carried over as a groundwater credit? That would require a new allocation rule. Can the accounting system update quickly enough to support market trades? What geographical information about transfers will be made public? So we talked about making quantity and price information anonymized, but make that public. And that raises the question, how much geographical information can be made public without undermining the anonymity of the market? And then a question was asked, should there be one more round of bids and offers 30 days after the end of the water year? We talked about this as a true up period, right? Since people won't learn the status of their year-end water use until 30 days after the water year. The question was asked, should there be one more true up period? Another outstanding question here that I forgot to write down, but I'll mention is that we also need to develop a comprehensive mitigation strategy to support the disadvantaged community trigger. So if trading is going to cease in a particular analysis zone because of impacts to a disadvantaged community, we need a process for resolving those, mitigating those impacts so that trading can resume. And so a comprehensive mitigation policy is also something that needs to be developed. Aaron, anything you want to add about that was discussed late last year?
No, I'll just highlight some of in the updates from that time when we last met, and some of the things we've been doing. But no, that sounds good to me.
Okay, Craig, what's on the next slide? All right, so
I think
do you
we
want to talk about this now, or do you want to talk about this in a different context, Aaron?
Well, maybe what I'll do is quickly just give folks an update. You know, we've been doing a lot of work since October to take advantage of the time. And so let me start actually with the engineering side. Matthew noted that the request was to use the field shapes that we did with the revised GSPs, but some of them didn't make much sense and they were not lining up. And Provost and Pritchard and Montgomery Associates started sitting down and thought, you know, this would be an easy process to just move the lines to snap to things that make sense. And then it triggered a bunch of questions. And then, you know, when that happens, the questions trigger another movement that triggers another question. So I was supposed to get a revised map this week. I think they're still working on it because I don't have it yet. But so they're well on their way to that process of getting us a revised map and then discussing those triggers. So is it 25 feet below the minimum threshold that you need to be or above? So that because if you hit the minimum threshold and your well is in jeopardy, not at the minimum threshold, it could be above that minimum threshold. So they're evaluating that impact. Matthew and the team and everybody met with the water dashboard. So for folks that aren't familiar, the water dashboard is the online tracking system that's been established by the 3 GSAs for evapotranspiration. I think most of the growers in the room here have their accounts and are using it. And I think the request we heard is make sure that we use that platform to track the water going in and water going out and theoretically the market. So the guy that's doing all the programming, he was made aware when we started the program, this might be a potential. But again, when we built our program here, the goal was not to accidentally hire folks that would then lead us to their product, right? So then, you know, if you have a software development firm that's offering a water marketing strategy, you end up in their platform, whether you like it or not. So in this situation, I think that decision was wise because we have options. And so we can move into the water dashboard. What we discovered is that we're literally designing the water dashboard as we move along. It's not a packaged piece of software we had. So we're kind of going as we move along. So that tasking our consultant with okay, now you got to build a market in your water dashboard. It basically was not right now achievable at this point in time. So if we're going to move to a pilot program, we're going to need to find something. Now, what he can do is strap onto a third-party package. And what I know Steve and a few of us, and I think Chuck, you and I talked a little bit about is using a third-party software to do the market. And then our water dashboard just looks at that software and sees the transaction and reports it to you on your dashboard. So you won't even know you're in a third party. He can envelop that and encapsulate it. It's like an app on your phone. You don't even know you're using, a third party system. And
So from the user interface, it would just look like you're on the dashboard.
correct.
Is there something out there that's already built that you're looking at, or in other words, that's being used in other industries or other purposes, or is this something that's going to be developed from scratch, or what's it?
No, we're looking at available software. So we don't get trapped in this. Matthew's not necessarily aware of this to the fullest extent yet, because we wanted to bring it to the committee first. But Matthew has, and we will be setting up a meeting with Matthew, but he has a very simple, so the idea is, and it's going to play into this concept here. So let me explain the transfer bucket system, and then it'll all kind of make sense. But Matthew has a existing platform that allows two people, Sophie and Joe, to enter into a transactional deal on an app. But you need to know what's for sale, and you need to know and then backtrack it. So that it is a third-party software where you can load the water that you want to sell it, and then it gets tracked back in our dashboard. So let me explain. So
then you load it into this universe of available waters.
Yep. Then
And the constraints are within that as well. It says it can only move so far this distance, or what other constraints
we will be
applied.
we'll be evaluating that with with Matthew. Again, he's not, we would like to get your feedback on this because right now our programmer would love to write that all for us. If he had 7 hands and 20 employees and, you know, all the time in the world. I'm hearing, especially from the growers around me, is that, Aaron, you need to have this up and running this year. Don't think that we're going to let you get by with, oh, excuses and next year you can bring this, because people are going to need to do true ups. Potentially, even with this wet year, a few folks may be doing some true ups this year and might need to buy some water. Interestingly enough, this wet year has created the market for recharge. So again, let me just touch on that really quick. TID fired up on like the second week of January. Really, we could not fill up our system because with these atmospheric rivers, the lower Kaweah River was down. And so the only leg open was the St. Johns River. So Marco was concerned if Dry Creek or we get flood flows, there's only 2 big turnouts that can manage big flows. That was TIDs and lakesides. And so one of them's above Visalia and one's below Visalia. So Marco came and said, I'm going to leave the system low for a week or 2 just to protect in case. And I said, yeah, we better do that. After we got out of the storm window, now everything's full. Now we're rocking and rolling it. We're at about 750 to 800 CFS. We looked back at our records in January. Our average wet year recharge is about 350 CFS, and we're at about 800. So we doubled our capacity for recharge.
Are there people seeking water too? Growers?
Everywhere. We have right now 80 turnouts on. Traditionally, we'd probably only have like a half a dozen because it's too wet. Nobody wants to touch it.
Well,
Right.
we've been irrigating for a couple of weeks.
You just, as soon as you got it.
As soon as we got it.
So now the interesting part is Aaron, I did all this recharge and I don't think I'm going to need it, but my neighbor might need it. I need to be able to move it to him. And right now our rules don't allow that because you need to do it in the market. So there's an immense amount of pressure out there to just get this thing going. That's tempered against, yeah, but we got to do it right. So this is what we were kind of thinking of, right? So right now, generally speaking, there are 4 buckets of water currently designed in your water dashboard: the native or sustainable yield, the tier 1, the tier 2, and then groundwater credit. We call anything that moves over or it can't fall in those 3 buckets basically a groundwater credit. So water that you had left over from last year moves forward to this year and gets dumped in the groundwater credit bucket. So right now you have those 4 buckets showing up on your water dashboard. What I'd like to do is add a 5th bucket called the transfer bucket, which is a mechanical bucket, meaning you as a landowner
Choose how, from where you're gonna pour it.
Correct.
to
Yeah. And when you choose to put it in the transfer bucket, we could do all the filtering and the checking and make sure it can move into that bucket. So
If I could make, before you leave this slide, if I could make a suggestion, if you're gonna have this kind of as an example for growers and so on, you may wanna have like a flow chart that has lines that say water
Yeah.
move down from here to here vis-a-vis by these methodologies.
I kind of have something like that.
Okay,
Sorry,
all right, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it, so.
Craig, this little thing takes over your mouse. So
Okay.
yeah, so step 1 is, okay, grower has to acknowledge I want to sell part of my allocation. So that's step 1. Step 2 is okay, grower, I need to, the system will establish the amount of allocation to sell. And it can't be greater than the 10 inches right now under the pilot program. We're identifying the 10 inches. But like we said, we're not saying, remember, at first the committee said, well, it can only be your native yield. What we then said is, well, does it really just have to be your native yield? What if you want to take your tier 1 and you have 10 inches in there? Even more interesting, what if you had, I can do it. Nope. I have 5 inches of groundwater credit and then 5 inches of tier 2. You can even do that, but the system will double check. I have 100 acres. I can only move my total amount is 83 acre feet. So it'll do the double check. So that's step 2. Step 3 is which bucket do I want to take it from, right? So now you can mix and match, but you have to mechanically move it over to that transfer bucket to get it over into your system. The dashboard, once you select it, will move that allocation and verify that the water is there available, and then move it over into the transfer bucket. So now it's sitting in the transfer bucket, right? Now the other system picks it up here, and that's where we're looking at the third-party water market system. However, it'll be on the dashboard as if it's a button there. So it's not like you have to go.
And if it doesn't transfer, then it just reverts back and moves down.
Correct. And it goes back to its home. So that water market is that third party. And again, we will be meeting with Matthew to evaluate his package system, whether it would work or not for this pilot. And then that water market is step 5. The exchange administrator on the exchange platform sees the amount in the transfer bucket and can then match the buyer and the seller based upon the needs. And in your system, and we haven't even talked to Matthew, his system might do it automatically, right? And optimize that connection. Then once it's matched up, the buyer submits payment for the transfer of the allocation, and the exchange administrator moves the allocation from the seller's bucket to the buyer's transfer bucket, and then it goes back onto the back through the system on the water dashboard. Now it's on the buyer's dashboard. So the pivotal thing in that was this.
Is there gonna show will it show a source when it comes back to the dashboard, the source of that water for accounting purposes?
My thought is initially when it comes back, it goes back into this groundwater credit bucket. Because that's the catch-all, right? Is the groundwater credit bucket.
Is that really carryover? When you say groundwater credit, if you had to define that, what would you?
Anything that's not native yield in tier 1 and tier 2. So if you do recharge,
It's gonna have years and different colors within that groundwater credit bucket too.
correct. Well, and
Because of the exploration of that.
in the greater and the east, it is. In the mid, we're evaluating it different because in talking with folks, that vintage year thing is a nightmare, right? Because it's the first in, first out, but then you got to keep generational. What we're talking about in the mid-kaweah is capping the total volume you can carry over. So you can't build an account that's so big it's 5 times your parcel size of evapotranspiration usage. So we'll limit the amount of volume, and then you live within that volume maximum. It's going to be a moving target over time. We'll have to learn, but then we're not tracking generations of water supply, because in talking with Scott, it's like he can set it up to do it, but it's going to take a lot of ground truthing to know I took off the 2020. I've got 2023 in there. I've got 2024. I got 2025.
Well, you would always, you would think it would default to the oldest water first. It would draw from that bucket until it depletes or expires.
I think that's the general thought. That's what East Kaweah is running with, right? You got to use your oldest first.
Yeah, oldest first until you
First
deplete it or the water expires, in which case you lose it.
First in, first out on the native or those kind of carryovers, but the surface water credit doesn't have an expiration.
And so what we've talked to the growers is what's going to happen is you're going to get pumping in years when you don't even, they're not going to want to lose it, so they're going to pump it potentially. So we're looking at, well, if you just create a max bucket, right, you get to carry it over for as long as you want, but you can only carry over that maximum amount. Then, and it's a big, like, for instance, the couple guys said, give us 2 years worth of supply in a bucket. We can survive on that.
Like accruing vacation.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter whether you
Right.
use the most recent or
Yep.
the oldest
Right.
vacation, you can only accrue so much.
Yep.
Can I just ask a question on how that plays out? So you have years of drought, so people are pumping because they have credits. What's happening? I know we've got the mitigation for DACs and guidance, but is that really bringing us into sustainability, this concept?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as we've learned, the original, if you look at the 2020 GSPs, the concept was this glide path. There's no such thing. so now I refer to it as building buffers. So in a wet year like this, you're going to build a buffer. It's just like your bank accounts, right? You try and build, because you might get let off, carry 6 months of, salary. It's the same thing. You're going to build yourself 2 years worth of drought, and that level should come up, and you should have it. And you're allowed to go down. You have to. It's just law of nature. If you want your community to survive, you're going to have to build it and use it. Build it. It's just like we use our reservoirs up Lake Kaweah. You got to fill it and you got to use it. What we found over time is people that try and ride their reservoirs too high never get the benefit of it. Yep. That we found that they don't operate it properly if you keep it full all the time. Same thing with the groundwater system. We just can't go down to the minimum thresholds, right? So the vintage year concept works. It's a first in, first out. We also use that rule in a lot of our agreements and other things. But what we found over time is it causes you to have pressures to use it when you don't have to, if the circumstances don't match up perfectly. If we allow you to accrue a bucket, then you can carry it over for quite a while. You save it until you actually need it, or and that seems to be resonating with folks a little bit better than this vintage year, because even growers I've talked to, like, okay, yeah, you're gonna have 2023 and you got to use this leave behind and that leave behind and and they're like, I'm checking out. That's too much work.
Well, the other thing too is you can't really establish any markets. You have so many
Variables.
so many different commodities that you're trading, as opposed to.
Well, that's true, because we'll have to figure out whether you're trading 2023 credits or.
Yeah, so these are going to be pretty thin markets at the beginning anyway. If you turn them into 5 different things, then you don't really know what market prices are.
However, we're prepared for it because the greater and the east will be using vintage water. I call it vintage water. Like, it's going to carry a date with it.
But mid is not.
We're trying a different approach.
Yeah. Okay.
We're not sold on it either. We're still trying to work it out.
Good.
But I mean, the other way was, unless you want to buffer it out, but then what you do is at the end of the, you can accumulate so much, but then beyond that, so that some people would say, well, that wasn't enough. I mean, we had 3 wet years and then, that maybe there's some depreciation on it, if you will, on that water.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're going to exceed that, you're going to have some leave behind.
Yeah.
So potential.
The reverse has been said too, is that, well, Aaron, if you only allow us to collect up so much water and there's a maximum, then what if we have a whole bunch of wet years? Then I'm not going to want to go do on-farm recharge anymore. I go, yeah, we're going to have to figure that out. I just don't see that realistically in the hydrology. Hey, that's a nice problem to have. That's a perfect problem to have. But generally speaking, what we're seeing is 1 wet year, an average year, and 3 dry years. So you, in that wet year and that average year, you got to build up a reserve to cover you in the other 2 to 3 dry years. That's why we're saying give us at least 2 years worth of buffer bucket. So that's theoretically, if the average crop around here is 2.5, give us 5 feet of buffer that we can carry, build up. And it's our job to build it up. And that's on top. So they say, if we get 5 feet of buffer and the TID mid-kaweah allocation, we should be okay. And those numbers are all dynamic.
Are the limitations in step 2 through 4 GSA driven, and will they be kind of fed into the water dashboard?
Yes. Yeah.
So those are the rules that are based on like GSA adoption.
Yeah.
The rules and regs in the east, like greater right now, don't really have the step 2. They don't have this. These step 2 and 3 allocations are from the pilot we're looking to do, not the actual rules for the east or the greater.
So you're saying that
the
if
10-inch limit is unique to the version 1.0 water market.
Okay.
It was the committee's recommendation to limit it to the 10 inches, which was really based upon, let's just only move the native yield. The East Kaweah, by nature of sheer, they have to be able to transfer as much as they can just to survive, had to go to that. It's an open, there's no maximum. You can only, But you can only transfer up to the 2.5, right?
The actual pumping for ET is capped at 2.5 in any particular management, well, really the whole east,
So
but
there is a cap, it's just, it could be greater than 10 inches. And in the greater Kaweah, there hasn't been a determination yet.
Not that I'm aware of, I've not made all the meetings.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think, I think there's still some, for instance, the rules and regulations are still being kind of renegotiated at this point.
there's no cap on what I could transfer to someone, but there's a cap on what someone in the east could actually get and pump. There's a hard cap of 2.5
Oh.
acre feet of pumping.
He could supply,
I could transfer-
everything,
you know,
but the buyer can only, is limited by,
2.5 on all the parcels he has in that area.
So are we counting on the dashboard to account for all limitations, whether they're, I mean, I suppose if it's a GSA limitation or a marketing strategy pilot limitation, are we counting on the dashboard as the place to kind of capture all of that? So we are making sure people aren't trading things they can't trade? I mean, I guess that's kind of a higher level question, but like,
I think, yes.
okay.
Yeah, I think we're
Yeah,
trying.
that would be my earnest recommendation.
Put
Like,
that in the
if you
notes.
think about it,
I
But
thought you
think
might
about-
have some.
but think about the dashboard is how people learn the status of their water use.
Right.
What you really want to avoid is that thing sends them misinformation about what they can transfer. And remember, we're not just talking about market transfers, we're also talking about non-market transfers, right? And so it feels like the dashboard needs to embed those allocation rules. And then the addition of a 10-inch rule for market transfers is a simple addition once you're implementing all of the other allocation rules.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying, Valerie, is like, say for some weird reason, we have a good reason to say, you can transfer native and groundwater credit, but not tier 1 and tier 2. How are you gonna make that rule effective? Are you gonna effectuate that rule?
Right. I'm assuming from a user interface, you want someone to log into the dashboard and have a realistic view of what they have available to trade or market, and they'll be able to go there and really know the rules that apply to them because of their GSA and because of the market
Mhm.
strategy.
So I would envision that the water dashboard would say, okay, I want to go sell. And it says, and you're going to go into like a water market or transfer tab.
Mhm.
And when you open that, it's going to say, because you own 100 acres.
Right.
In the mid-kaweah, you're limited by the 10 inches because we're going to run the pilot.
Right.
And so that equates to you have the potential to move 83 acre feet. And then you go into your 4 buckets and you're going to look at all the water supply you have and say you have 200 acre feet distributed, through the 4 buckets, you got 50 acre feet in each one of those.
Right.
So I'm going to take 50 acre feet out of my native yield and 30 acre feet out of my groundwater credit.
Mhm.
And when I go to functionally make that movement into the transfer bucket, the system goes, yeah, you've got it. And okay, I'll go put it in there. And
Right.
yeah, it's still under your 83.
Okay.
Yeah, because the big one is it might say, no, you already pumped 30 acre feet of native. You can only move 20 of those, right? And the dashboard needs to be able to do that accounting.
For the true ups.
Yep.
Now, this would also apply though, if you're moving it from one parcel to another parcel that you have, correct?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Because,
Okay.
well,
If they're
Because
managed together,
for-
you mean?
if they're managed together, right now, at least my understanding of it is
But what if you have
it
parcels
automatically.
over there near this community that's under duress?
It would,
And you know what I'm talking about?
yeah, that's a good point, Joe. We'll have to get the system to watch out for that. So maybe you're right. Maybe this system has to be used for the transfer. So you functionally move it.
It's just a matter of if there's no money exchange, there's no money exchange, but it's between parcel. I mean,
Right
I
now,
don't know. I mean, because you can also move between GSAs.
so right now, I know in the mid-kaweah, because we looked at that, is because we didn't want to overcomplicate it and have to run all of that. Basically, what we did is, Joe, you run, 300 acres, you look like one big bucket.
Mhm.
So it just
Well, I mean,
melds.
for some, if it's all pertinent and so on,
Yeah.
it may be such, but you may have people who have properties 15 miles away.
Yeah.
Some of they're in the east and they're in the greater and maybe even property in the mid.
We have a few handfuls that stretch kind of far apart. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we'll have to look at that. But for water marketing, Joe sell to Soapy. This would be a transfer bucket. It could be used for Soapy sell from left hand to right hand. And it's just a good accounting, kind of like if you had 2 or 3 different businesses, you got to keep the book straight if you're going to move money across the line.
Right.
I think we have to have that to be able to assess sustainability, because by trading, just because Valerie and I'm moving it to another, she and I own property together and hers is on the other side of the valley. I moved to what's happening to the sustainability where I'm taking it from.
Right, so would that capture that? I mean, if you go into the dashboard and you say, I'm managing a portfolio of lands, if you're moving between lands in your portfolio on the dashboard, do you go through this process? Or
Not right now.
not right now?
Yeah, not right now. But that's a good question.
I could see where you could potentially maybe to minimize that amount of movement and so on, that if they're, say, in the same management area and so on, these could be considered as one unit. That it's when you start crossing management areas and you have to set them up as different entities.
When you cross GSA boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah.
right.
I think we as GSAs need to evaluate that separately. And I think that's a good point. But as far as marketing is concerned, this covers it regardless. And you did bring up another good question is, okay, so you're talking about rules about how much you have available and that sort of thing. The water dashboard, there's another set of rules that the committee is discussing that those rules would necessarily be tested and run in the water market app, not in the water dashboard, right,
Yeah,
Matthew? Because that's where you're checking if the zone is in minimum threshold, or if it's you transfer it too far away, that sort of thing, right? That check happens in the water market app.
Let me ask you
I think
this.
he's nodding yes, but we only see his forehead.
Let me ask this question.
Sorry, yes.
On these zones, when you have these disadvantaged communities and so on, so when you have a disadvantaged community, is there a region around it that's defined as a management area that's within 1 mile, 2 miles, 5 miles of that?
I think that
Is that how that's going to be set up?
that was one of the questions. Remember, like
How far away?
that was one of the questions that's come up, because if you look at the mid-kaweah, when we had like Okieville was in the southwest quadrant. So you're going to take out the whole southwest quadrant. So they're trying to figure out what that buffer zone, and I'll be very honest, we kind of backed into it from, we're looking at the analysis of how far you need to place a recharge basin in order to have an impact. Yeah, so it's actually, that zone is kind of, from a modeling, you can kind of determine where that zone starts dissipating. And then here's the other trick is that, I mean, for instance, TID is going to try and buffer that so that the market can stay open by putting the recharge basins around the communities. So we've twofold win-win on that scenario, but I think that's what we're going to get to. But that was one of the questions that came up. So mid-kaweah, are you really sure you want to just leave that whole quadrant as one big block? Or do you want to discretize it into maybe another block? So that if it gets removed, because you don't want to impact something 5 miles away from a disadvantaged community that isn't having any effects. Yeah. So I think Matthew and I and Craig were wondering, is there any red flags to adding this concept to the water marketing strategy, the transfer bucket? Simply, and is the water marketing strategy comfortable with us pursuing the water marketing application now to be infused into the pilot program, namely us evaluating with Matthew whether his application can do it only within the pilot, and then we evaluate down the road, because if we want to get something up and going this year, again, from a GSA perspective, I'm going to wear my GSA hat now. I can't burden the programming team now working on the dashboard with a water marketing strategy, or else all the other pieces crumble underneath because there's a lot of programming that's going on right now to get the east and the greater up and going. That's his focus right now. Because I think the east, you have a date of April for invoices. That's right around the corner. Yeah, it's right around, yeah.
So if I understand this right, once it's in the bucket, the origin is where it came from, whether it's native, tier 1, 2, or credit is lost.
No, we would
Not lost,
carry,
no.
yeah, we would carry, because what happens if you move it into the market, you find a buyer only buys half of it, right? You got to put the other half back. We'll have to figure that out. Or the simplification is it loses its title and it goes back into the groundwater credit. Because my thought was when the buyer buys it on his dashboard, it's going to show up in the groundwater credit.
So it's just
Well, that's the problem. If you're doing it in the
you're
east,
getting out of it
you
then.
gotta use it in that year if you buy some of the tiered stuff.
That's why we were, the year thing
There's
really is.
no more credit to that once you take
The
tier
year
1
thing
or
is
2.
very, very, in my mind, and James, and it's not something like, oh, we've been thinking about a long time. It literally, like the last 2 or 3 weeks, James and I have been sitting down trying to figure it out. But the year, because we needed to figure out the year thing as we start talking about our mid-kaweah's long-term rules and regulations. And in listening to the conversation about the years, it literally every time you add a year, you add a 10-fold incremental amount of work to track. I know the first in, first out is easy on a spreadsheet, but multiply that by 5,000 accounts across multiple fields. The table is unwieldy. So if you had a, and I like that, Chuck, it's like your vacation account. I get 3 weeks a year. I am allowed to go to 1.5 times that, but it gives you that, that's what we're playing with. You can carry 5 feet of per acre, 5 acre feet per acre of credit, but that's it. It does have its issues. Now, well, I'm at 5. I'm not going to do any more groundwater recharge. I don't have to. So, but again,
So is there a reason for this transfer bucket to simplify it when it moves from the portal to Matthew's software? Is that the whole reason for doing this?
no, it was.
I guess I don't.
You don't get why. Why would you do it?
It's adding another step, and what are you gaining from it?
It's the psychological that it's not as automated. You as the grower have to go through the movement, and then in that movement, it removes a lot of issues off the GSAs and the other factors because you chose to move it over, and then the water dashboard does the check. When you move it over, physically move it over, it's going to do the check.
It removes any
Yeah, and
need to have allocation rules really of which comes first, right? If you're picking, I'm gonna move tier 1, tier 2, then I don't have to write a rule that says when you move water, right?
Yeah.
Like if you say I want to move my,
As opposed to a fully automated process.
you say,
It's a manual process and it's much easier to implement.
and you get to choose.
And they can't point the finger at you.
Well, and when
CYA.
what we were struggling with, we were trying to figure out how the allocation rules interact with potential transfers, and some of the allocation rules start to become dizzying in their complexity. This is a very simple way to apply a number of different rules. It will apply the different levels. Are you selling native? Are you selling tier 1? Are you selling tier 2? Right. So it does that accounting by you manually moving it. It makes sure that that the person offering water for transfer actually has the water available in their allocation, right? It applies not just the 10-inch limit, it actually makes sure that they haven't already pumped it. And so it was just I thought it was an elegant way when Aaron recommended it to implement a number of rules that interact.
I told my wife I do have bright ideas. She laughed.
Is there any limitation if you're a grower in a non-districted area that isn't within the CVP service area? To buy water that is from the tier that has CVP in place?
You mean like a place of use limitation?
There is.
Yeah.
There is.
The only tiered stuff would be in the groundwater credit that's derived from surface water.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
all the rest is groundwater.
But this won't allow you to expand the CVP place of use, right? So if you're taking a CVP,
well, yeah, CVP. yeah.
right, so the CVP or the SWP, any water right has a place of use. So if you're taking tier 1 water, that's CVP water, and you're selling it to someone who's outside that place of use, you do have this kind of outside GSA allocation, outside the water marketing strategy. You just have a water right issue that now you're putting CVP water on non-CVP, a non-CVP place of use. I mean, CVP and SWP have very large places of use. So I don't know if that would ever come into play, but it might.
It might.
At the district level, and whether or not the district allows that credit to go outside the district boundaries.
Well, and in our subbasin, realistically, I don't even know what ground is not covered by CVP
Because
Because
of the
of Coulee
conservation district.
because of Coulee Delta.
There's a small sliver west of East Kaweah and south of Kings River, or Kaweah, Delta Water
A
Conservation
little bit of the
District.
Thule stuff, but it's kind of in the Thule area, but they're covered. Thule.
No, there's some, what we need to do is
Place of use, the thick crayon line actually cuts off the east side of part of my district.
Yeah.
We serve that with chum to water.
It's-
Everything in the valley is pretty much.
but if it's within Coulee Delta, it's Coulee Delta enveloped us all.
It's
Me
not,
though.
it's not
Okay.
within Kaweah.
Well, that's,
There's
okay, then you don't get the,
properties that
you don't get
I'm
the
not
trade.
I'm not aware of that problem. Yeah.
See how this, it just like, it's a never ending.
Well, the problem is tier 1 and tier 2 are gone in X number of years anyway.
Well,
The remaining credits carry, but those are gone.
you're
You're gonna
right.
be dealing with native, and you're gonna be dealing with multiple flavors of a groundwater credit.
Yeah. But Craig, wouldn't you agree that that groundwater credit, and so my read on it, right, Valerie, is that if it's for CVP groundwater credit, that groundwater credit has the same restrictions, no?
Yes.
Sorry, ask that again.
I take a CVP molecule, put it in the ground,
Mhm.
when it comes out, it has the same restrictions as the surface water did.
Sure, it still remains surface water
Yeah.
so long as you don't abandon it. That's why the groundwater credit
Mhm.
makes me a little uncomfortable because it's only groundwater if you abandon it or if it's native yield. So if it's tier 1 or tier 2 water that you're not abandoning, that's still might be a credit, but I wouldn't call it groundwater.
Multiple buckets.
It's
There's
my own issue, but
groundwater credit. There
So
has
we need to rename that groundwater credit bucket something else.
that's why I asked. is
Allocation,
groundwater
allocation
Carry
credit.
over or, yeah.
Yeah, allocate, okay, that, I'll get with, I gotta get with, I'll get with, Scott and the dashboard team and rename that allocation credit or
Yeah.
something.
I like that name better.
I guess, 2 questions then, any concern with the transfer bucket? It's not, we'll continue to work on it. We're not asking, this is not, none of this is final, this is all just introductory. And then if we can continue to evaluate the software package through. So the idea is to meet with Matthew, see what his can do, and then meet with Scott. And then have Scott as the guy who's programming the water dashboard. And then Scott and Matthew can work together, and what they use is APIs to connect each other. And those APIs swap information back and forth.
Does that happen between step 4 and 5? Is that right? So step 4 is kind of like where the dashboard not stops, but that's kind of its purview. And then step 5 would be the secondary.
In my chart, yeah.
Okay.
And then the exchange platform and the exchange administrator take it from step 5 all the way through step 7.
Right. And then they talk back. It looks like they talk again at step 7.
Yeah, and I realized that now as I finished my thought, I was like, well, wait a second, what happens? Then that water molecule has to go back into there should be another diagram off here to the side that has another 4 buckets of the buyers.
flows it back into the.
Yeah. And it goes back into that
Yep.
allocation of the buyer.
Yeah, so Aaron, it's like a symmetric, you need the mirror image on the other side and the water goes into the other person's transfer bucket.
Yep. Does that? Any,
And if you can't, this is probably a stupid question, but I'm not sure. When you transfer it going back, does it go back into a particular tier 1, tier 2, or native?
no, that, my thought was it, and I'll bring it back at the next meeting when it comes out of the water market and everything's sealed deal. It, on the symmetric side, you're gonna have buyer with those 4 buckets. It goes in his or her groundwater credit bucket that will be named the allocation bucket credit.
That's simple, but that doesn't line up with the rules as they sit in 2 of the GSAs right now. That's the only problem.
And again,
Yeah.
Well, and
was-
that's where you have the set of qualifying, you almost have to have the qualification process going.
You gotta have the dashboard, check it on the other end and reflavor it if it has to go in a different
Yeah,
bucket.
yeah.
What do you
That's
mean
where
by
you
that?
have that, where it getting to red to red is on the water dashboard, and then in between is the market, right? Because you're saying you can't go more than 2.5 feet. Somebody's already,
Well, there's the whole plethora of it, right? You can't, if you move tier 1 or tier 2 in the East Queen, it's gotta be used in the year you move it.
See, that's,
So it would turn into like a first in, first out, because you,
So the mirror, you're saying that the mirror would be hypothetically, we'd have another transfer bucket. It moves from red bucket to red bucket. Is there a decision on the other side of how you take that water and put it into your own buckets? Or is there an automatic rule?
I think it would depend on the flavor it came out of over here.
So
The
for
way the rules
example,
are written.
If you moved green into red, the other side you had red, you couldn't move that water that you bought from green tier into native. I mean, you couldn't put it wherever you wanted, right?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
it's a mirror image, but it's
It's a mirror image, and then your tier,
That makes it very clear.
so it's complicated, this is why you're struggling. So in the East Queen, you
Yep.
owner has tier 1, right? They can carry it for 5 years before they lose it.
Okay.
They don't lose any of it until they either use it or move it. But if you move tier 1, whoever buys it has to use it in that water year. They lose the carryover ability once they move that tier 1.
So they could never, so let's say they buy tier 1 water. You lose your 5 years because you transferred, that person has to use it that year. So you could never move it into an allocation credit.
No, you would basically be using it up, and then the flip of that, you would be saving your native or something else because you're using that water you just bought.
But they get
Right,
the-
so
don't
East has a
gain the
5th
water.
bucket, it sounds like.
yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Thinking you need, because all of those rules all tend to require the user to use it in
In the
that
year they
year, right?
purchased.
At least on the transfer of tier 1 and tier 2, native doesn't have any restrictions on that, other than the 5-year carryover. And then the groundwater credits, they don't, other than the surface water credit. That
You
is the
had to do
groundwater
that, or
credit.
You
Well,
could just game the system, and every 4 years you sell the water and get another 5 years.
So the beauty of this is that when you go into that column between where we're at and the transfer bucket, those are all rules that the GSAs are setting up and can customize.
Yeah.
And they are custom, they're all different. And the water dashboard takes care of it. What this committee is responsible for then is really that transfer bucket water market rules
In the middle.
in the middle. And then you can have your own rules on the other side, but we just have to set them up.
Yeah, so actually, Aaron, the limitation of this diagram is if you get rid of the transfer bucket in the market, it already, those 4 buckets are inadequate to describe the East Kaweah allocation system. You need an extra bucket that must be used this year.
Well, isn't
and
that,
same with the grader, because they have the same, they have actually leave behinds on native and some others, and losses on the
Yeah.
tiers, so.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
do you guys have you can hold tier 1 water for 5 years and then it's after that's just all gone?
lose it, use it, or market it, yeah.
There's no decreasing. It's not like you lose 10% a year. It's just 5 years, all or nothing.
5 years gone.
Well, but the Greater Kaweah is doing.
Greater Korea has losses by each.
Right.
Which
Okay.
makes sense, because you're gonna lose water.
Sure.
It's not gonna all stay there, but.
Sure, for
we're
migration.
transferring water that doesn't exist.
Well, the
If there's
difference
no
is
lead
when we
behind.
go to look at the allocation the next year, we're taking into account how much names are on water that's still in the ground. So it actually is reducing, once you start naming all the water, it's reducing down what's left for your, anything above a native allocation.
Okay.
That's the way you protect all the water you allocated up. It's got a name on it now.
So did you just say that your allocation from year to year is dependent on your carryover? Or is that like from a GSA wide scale?
I get it.
Been doing is we've had Provost and Pritchard actually look at, and we're always lagged a little bit. They look at the fall water level readings,
Right,
figure out water and storage above the ET,
right. And then take into
Take out-
consideration carryover.
take out anything that's named already and take out what they think the demand is in the current year you're in, or an estimate of it. And that's the amount left to look at any allocations above native.
Okay.
And that's why we could barely justify the 0.3 tier one this year, because there's just not anything.
Right.
Well, it sounds like if you guys are comfortable with it, I'll come back, refine this a little bit more, maybe give an example, a couple examples, and we'll maybe try and put a mid and east and a greater example. And then kind of like a gaming tool. And then, but if there's no significant, hesitation to try use this concept, I think the team would like to vet it a little bit further.
I think examples would be very helpful.
Okay.
And I'm
Yeah,
not,
I think some
I
pro
don't mind
formas.
the third-party app deal to actually do the logistics of the marketing part and then put it back on the dashboard to where it saves the knowing the issues on the dashboard program, and it saves the.
Yeah, you're closest to that issue. so
Saves
you
the
know
issues
that-
on that.
You know
So
that solves a huge problem for us because we were going to saddle our water dashboard programmer with something. He's really entered. He really when we met with him,
but
he wants to do it. It's
like you said, if he had a staff of 20 people behind him, I would say fine, but he
he's a
doesn't.
one-man show. So, okay, we'll do that then.
So we're gonna do some pro forma examples.
Correct.
of Different methods and
Yeah.
so on.
Maybe even to set up, okay, you guys trade, what are you gonna do, right? And then we could just set something up. And we'll see where.
Is there a clear delineation of the rules that are gonna be handled inside
GSA.
the water dashboard as opposed to the market?
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at. Steps 1 through 4 happen in the water dashboard. Steps 5, 6, 7 get handled in the
But
water
I
market.
heard the discussion about proximity, geographic. Those are the rules I'm talking about. None of that is gonna happen inside the dashboard. All of that.
No,
will
it
happen.
happens in the water market.
So there are different sets of
There are.
rules in
Yep.
each one. I just wonder, as part of that example, if you could put all of a list of rules that are handled inside the
You're
dashboard.
gonna need a middle part before you get to your 2 buckets to show what the market part's gonna do.
Yeah, I think it's.
Well, and that's fine, but yeah, it, because you're really doing the kind of the same thing. You're just trying to take all the commonalities between all 3 GSAs and put it in that middle piece.
Yeah.
The market's gonna have to say, yeah, you can't, this buyer can't buy that water, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I just wonder how well this is gonna work if you have all this, if you end up with, instead of the 1 transfer bucket, you have, 1 in this GSA, but you have 5 in this other one,
Well, that's what we never.
which is gonna make it difficult to get buyers and sellers to understand.
Well, that.
Well, and
That's
and Chuck, and to clarify, there would still only be 1 transfer bucket. What will change are the number of buckets on the left-hand side.
In the right-hand side. Meaning, it all goes in the transfer bucket, but it gets fanned out based upon rules on the back in the dashboard.
Or whether you can put it in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But you really have, if it's going back in there, then you have 5 different types of water.
Sure, yeah, it has to keep track of where
And
the
so
water
you
came
have,
from.
you have 5 different markets, not 1 market.
That's why James and I have been really putting this is when I say James Fisher and I have been putting a lot of thought into this. And it's not going to go over well because I'm going to tell Ver you can only do so much, and that never sits well. But at the same time, it will simplify things. So we're just trying to figure out. We're having a lot of discussions. We're not wedded to it either. We may go to the year vintage thing too. It's just when we saw the discussion around the water dashboard in the years and the just how to do that, we're like, oh no, that we don't even know how you program the language. So we need to find an alternative. So anyways,
And you don't even know if those rules are going to stay that way.
Yeah, it's all.
You just need something in the middle that will match buyers and sellers.
Okay, we'll be back to you. Thank you. Oh, well, we didn't hear any folks online. Any concerns?
Anyone want to unmute your microphone?
Are there
or raise
any-
your hand?
Are there any in the chat? Craig? Okay. Okay, I think we can, Matthew, if you want to move on. Thanks, everybody, for the.
Yeah, that was very, very illustrative. Craig, you want to go to the next slide?
Oh,
Aaron,
so
I think this is yours.
Yeah, so I kind of gave that was all kind of some legal and engineering update. I think the only other legal update is, and actually we're going to get into it in a little bit, was the legal team. I have to thank Valerie for spending her holiday writing, and you're going to get the documents here in a minute, but we've now drafted some of the key documents that we think start the conversation, and then we can and chew them up from there. But it was a great start. I read it and everything connects and it makes sense. It incorporates the things that we've talked about. It's been delivered to the other two GSAs for their review, but we have not heard any feedback yet. So just reader beware that these documents are a starting point and we can work with them. But I think they're a really, really good start to what we're going to need. So we just have a little bit more work to do on it. I think we have a chapter to write on the existing water rights and laws, which is basically an encapsulation of Valerie's PowerPoint presentation, but we've made a huge amount of progress in that category. And I told you, I talked to you a lot about the engineering, and a lot of the engineering had to do with that map, the limits of where we think our mitigation measures are going to be, and the water dashboard / water marketing app. So now I think we're going to move on to the version 1.0. And Matthew, did you want to take it from here? And for folks, you should have received the link to the Dropbox, which we tried to moving it off if not, we'll resend it again. Sounds like Joe, we'll resend it again. We moved it off of the, Candriel moved it off of the SharePoint, and now we're on Dropbox, and I've been using it regularly. It's Craig and Candriel did a fantastic job organizing it. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
And Craig, so Craig, there is a summary slide on the PowerPoint real quick. Why don't we just show that, and then we'll jump back to the Dropbox. So we have currently in the Dropbox, and in a moment, Craig or Candriel is going to walk you through the structure of that filing system. But we have currently available for your review and comment draft strategy chapters 1, 2, and 5. We also have 3 important legal documents, draft legal documents. Those are the rules and regulations, a participant agreement, and then a resolution, draft resolution for adopting this version 1.0 of the water market. And so those are all there in we're going to walk through. So we're going to walk through the structure of these different files in the Dropbox folder, so you can see where you can find these. and then actually going to take an even closer look at the 3 draft legal documents. But our goal is for committee members to really take a good look at these in the next month and then have comments and edits back to us, questions, concerns back to us by the February committee meeting. By then you will also have draft chapters, some of the other draft chapters ready for review as well. So with that,
Matthew,
Craig,
do you want those in advance? How far in advance of the meeting? You don't want us to just bring it to the meeting, do you?
Aaron, what was your thought on that?
You know, I think our thought is actually to give you enough leeway and time to review it by the next February meeting, where we come back together to actually have a conversation about it. If you had comments, you could get it to us whenever, right? I mean, don't feel that there's a don't hold on to them. If you review it and you've got comments, get it back to us. But our goal is to just put it. Let's back. Our goal is to have as much the water marketing strategy ready for kind of final review in the April timeframe. So if you track backwards, and we're going to be talking about it in February, then we have 60 days from February to get it to finish. So if you're able to review it in the next 30 days, leading into our February meeting, and either the best case scenario is you get us comments before then, and worst case scenario is right after the February meeting you get us comments, then we work on those comments between March and April and try and bring what I would consider in administrative terms a final draft in April. That doesn't mean we're going to approve it in April, but what it may mean is, okay, that's where we're getting the very last edits and getting ready to adopt it. Maybe a special committee meeting that happens in April. Does that make
It's
sense?
going to be the third Tuesday.
Yeah, that's what we've been scheduling. Do you have a conflict or? Okay. That was a really
Conflict
long-winded.
every 3rd Tuesday.
Oh, you do. Okay. Should we? We'll discuss that issue. That's from a macro scale, the schedule. Matthew or Craig, do you have any?
Well, so again, just to reiterate, so we comments in advance of the February meeting would be helpful, but not necessary. We want you to have the time that you need. And so we are prepared to receive comments at the February meeting, or even a few days after if that's the time that you need, but they shouldn't be any later than a few days after the February meeting.
Yes. And we acknowledge that these are literally being written as we are talking to you. So they're all not even really done. So like I'm working on chapter, which one am I in? 6. So I still have to write that. 5. Yeah. Are you sure? Yeah. And then we have a little bit more work in chapter 4. And then 7, we're still working with Mike, right?
So Craig, do you want to just walk us through the organization and maybe
So
click through some of those basic outlines?
Yeah, if you don't have it in your email, I can send it out again. The only person that's not on the group yet is you. And so if you don't find, you just do a search for Dropbox in your inbox. You should have a link there, and it'll be able to provide you the right link into it. What we do ask is that all the committee members, those that have access to the site, this is just for the committee's use. It's not public distribution. So, these documents eventually be publicly vetted, but at this point, it's a work product of the committee itself. The structure of the files here essentially follows the annotated outline that we've reviewed with you in previous meetings. In each folder will be the working chapter that has been developed thus far for that section. And in some folders, like we have for in the water rights section, we have the current working file. And we've also included a superseded folder. So these would be the prior working copies. One second.
While you're scanning through that, if I may interrupt, ask a question. So there's a presentation that we received today with multiple buckets and all that put together. Is that going to be in the Dropbox as well?
We can put it in there.
Yeah, we'll have to load that in. This is the first time it's been shown. So the versions that are in here, if you see some initials next to it, it means it's a working version that's already been worked on by Mayor Fukuda, Matt Cleanup. I've also provided some comments in here. We've added these in and also with comments. So where you see a new text, if you hover over it, it'll show the author of that. And then you'll also see if there's a comment embedded to that. And some of the comments in here are those that become prompting to the committee members to think through and give us direction on where you want this to go.
So that's where then we should deposit our comments prior to the next meeting. and
You
so
can
on.
add comments into the sheet here yourself. If you want to have that as the place that you would share your observations, or you can have that on a separate offline version.
And so you'll notice in the top left corner, you can download the file by clicking on the download button if you'd like to work, outside of the online environment. And then you're welcome to send us that version, just attach it to an email, and we're happy to integrate the comments that way as well.
You can also open it in your browser and just edit it online. So this, okay. It's the word for web. Sometimes, depending on your computer, it can be a little clunky. So for most people, it's easier just to download a version and then upload it back in. And you all have read and write authorities into the Dropbox, so you can upload a file to this location yourself.
And Craig, back in the where we see all of the Dropbox folders, I was wondering, do you mind just briefly opening that annotated outline just so that people can remember what that looks like? Because it's sort of, as you said, it shows the structure of the different folders. So if you're having any trouble navigating the folders, you can go here and actually see how they're organized, and it'll even give you a sense of what you should expect to see in that section above. So these are numbered 1, 2, here's what is a 1 introduction, 2 is a groundwater market. You'll find folders labeled number 1 introduction, number 2 what is a groundwater market in the Dropbox filing system. And then for underneath the folder that says 2.0 what is a groundwater market, you're going to see a chapter, benefits of well-designed markets, right? And so this is the outline that shows how those other files, those nested folders and files are organized.
Just Matthew, too, what I found, just a quick demo, is the easiest way for you to add comments. If you're going to do, feel free to print it out and bring it in. But if you go with, I think it's open with Microsoft Word for Web, click on that. You can do all your editing just as if it's a Microsoft Word. Change that editing to suggestions or reviewing, I'm sorry, yeah. And then
It puts a comment line on the side.
you can, if you want to add a comment, you highlight something and then you add a comment, that little bubble window plus. Yep, and you can make a comment. You can even delete stuff in the text and it'll make a you can make an edit, like you don't want the word background as needed, you just want background. You can delete the as needed and it'll.
He just puts a line through it, leaves it there.
That way dynamically, and we get notified when you make changes so that we can go back and evaluate those changes.
Right?
Yeah, so Craig, why don't you erase and need? Let's see what that looks like.
Erase what?
And
And-
need under 1.1.
It'll show how it tracks the changes. Just delete it. So it strikes it out, and then it'll note that Craig made that change.
And the time that he did it as well.
One
So
really
this is-
One really-
Midnight.
Thank them.
Ignore most of it.
I just changed the clock on my computer.
one really frustrating thing with
But it's really
the
Change.
web version of Word is, Craig, will you make one more comment? And this is a newer feature in the web version. So type new comment. You must hit that little arrow to enter the post, right? And if you go back and try working in the document, you'll think you're working in the document, but it's actually working in this bubble on the right-hand side. So that's the only frustration I've had with the web version.
Yeah, it won't let you enter a new comment until you submit
Post
the
the other
first.
one.
Yep.
And I think, let's see if it still does this. No, it doesn't. Okay. Some of the versions that we have it. When you do in the SharePoint environment, you can actually put it to someone's attention in the chat by typing in their name and then give your comment and they automatically receive it.
That they
This
leaked
one
it.
doesn't. Look good.
Chuck's already on it.
So,
Yeah, I
and
had
it
put it. in my
constantly
Dropbox
saves it,
before.
so you don't
Forgot
have to
about
worry
it.
about trying to save. If the computer does crash for some reason, you don't lose your edits. It automatically saving it in the background.
So I think the next step we wanted to do, right, Matthew, was to kind of walk folks through some of the legal
Yep.
documents that Valerie created for us. All while in snowy Tahoe or right.
That was good. I was snowed in.
And so you see here, there's a water market rules, a participation agreement, and a resolution adopting the pilot.
Also added
And
in the rules and regulations that essentially was like a term of glossary of terms.
yeah, so why don't
So-
you can you rename that so it has glossary in it? Because the first file is called water market rules. Just add glossary in parentheses at the end.
One of the things they didn't do is kind of, and I know it was on my list, but I'll be honest, the reason I didn't do it is it's because I probably wanted more feedback or wasn't sure what to do with it, is the form between, like, I know that there was a GSA transfer form. I know that East has one existing, but I don't really understand the concept of how that form fits into the dashboard or the water market or why we're doing it.
I think it's in the place of that step 5
Okay,
through 7, because we don't have that right now. So East Kaweah had to set up something quasi this year to get going. So they have the form in order to effectuate step 5
5
through
to
7.
7. So actually kind of effectuate the transfer component,
Because that paper,
even though it's within the
Paper
same,
goes to GSA.
GSA. right?
and you're doing it right now, right?
I haven't, but there's been people that have submitted them, yeah.
Yeah, and so Valerie,
So
the other
right-
thing is
so
that
right now, the GSA or Mike or his staff they're having to go to the dashboard and make sure the guy has water or whatever else before they're gonna approve
Got it.
transfer. So
Okay.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
maybe we
and-
don't need that if we have those steps 5 through 7.
well, so Valerie, that's a question for the committee because for example, the way that the Fox Canyon water markets run is that if a match happens, the transfer is automatic, whereas the committee had expressed an interest in actually having those matches, having a form that is submitted to the GSA to approve that and finalize that transfer.
And is the
And that-
purpose of that is just to have the GSA sort of have a more formal role of saying, yeah, that's okay. I mean, on what basis would they say
I think
no?
so. That's a good question. So committee members, do you have any thoughts about that? This is something we discussed in the October meeting.
If there was an error or something, newfound information that, oh my gosh, we have a disadvantaged community just filed a,
Dry well.
filed a dry well thing. And this thing came across our desk and it hasn't been programmed in to restrict
That's a
it
good
and so
point.
on.
It's kind of a
That's an-
catch-all
huh?
type, catch-all type.
Kind of a catch-all to
Okay.
make sure that all the Ts were crossed and the Is were dotted.
Well, I think it can even be
I mean,
handled.
that's, you know, that's.
It could be handled within the water dashboard. So, Joe, you go in and you say, I'm gonna move 83 acre feet. Before it goes into your transfer bucket, an email gets sent to Mark Larson and he needs to say, okay. It just removes paper.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I
But
mean,
I'm not saying it needs to be done in paper. What I'm saying is
it needs
that
to be a check.
it's just basically a check to.
It's a good idea.
You know, because, you know, stuff happens, things sometimes you don't get, you know, programmed in. You know,
There's an okay on both ends.
what's that?
There's an okay on both ends. Say I want to.
I want to sell and I want to buy.
Okay, you're good. And then once the buyer's found, that's the ultimate, if it's gonna create an MT impact or something else on the
So,
GSA to say yes. Now, if we were all up to date and all the rules and all the limitations are all programmed in, then you could have the system do it, but
well, that was the idea with steps 1 through 4. Somewhere in there, it's going to do all those checks. But Joe's right. There's oddball situations that are happening. Maybe as we get better in time, but
Yeah, I think
this
you-
early
you know,
game,
Yes.
a human being has to make a back check because he's right. We're getting dry well things coming in. We may have just gone out and done well readings that are newer, fresher than what's in the system. So
Yeah, and who's assigned to do that would be important. I mean, if you assigned it to someone who's, you know, overwhelmed, they're just gonna be like,
well, that's the gift. We're all
Right.
we're all overwhelmed.
the equity ultimately is on the director.
That's what I was thinking. I mean.
It's on Hagman and the East Quid.
So 1 or 2 transactions slip through. Is that going to materially change anything?
Oh, I see. Yeah, the flip side of that.
Yeah.
Because there's a cost of
Yes.
managing all of this. And, you know, it sounds to me like everybody, well, we want to put our books on the computer, but we don't really trust it. So, you know.
I'm gonna run my manual ledger over here.
They go through and they do it twice. They do it. And we've got the ledgers right here and it's balanced perfectly. You're spending more time. Oh, I don't know, maybe there's a volume test or something above.
Spot check.
Or a spot check or something like that. It just, I've just found once you start doing this, it's very hard to say, okay, we're gonna stop doing it.
And I like your idea of the volume test. In other words, if it's a quantity that's pretty substantial, then you might want to just.
Or an audit, you know?
Oh, that
Or after the
we could
fact.
do
audits.
we could do quarter or an annual audit on how many transactions were made, where were they made, what the levels happened, and
I'm just thinking in real time, it might be difficult for someone to go in there and say, I'm gonna double check all the rules, make sure they're right.
Right.
well, I'm going to tell you right now.
And
you
be
know,
any more accurate than the system.
well, you guys are both right because I'm going to tell you right now. So, you know, when it was just James and myself, and then we were doing these well application things, the only way those got done were between 8 o'clock and midnight because it could not happen during the daytime. And then
When you do your best work, right?
yeah, exactly. One with a full, as I'm half asleep. And yeah, it was when I did my best work. And then I think everybody found out, man, it got to be a nightmare when they started rolling in really fast. And then a couple of growers, and then, you know, we had one grower that he submitted an application and then changed the driller midstream us. And that one notice got us all screwed up. One well, so how about we do this? We just need to put a placeholder there. We need to evaluate some sort of spot check along the way.
An audit
We're
or,
back, yeah,
or
backwards looking
Yeah.
on it.
And Aaron, you can imagine that any delay in approving those transfer forms is going to cause confusion and friction in the market, right? Because the exchange administrator is going to need to collect fees from buyers, but they can't really collect fees until they know that the transfer is actually going to go through. And so that means they can't really update people's transfer buckets until after they know that it's approved and it's paid for, and the whole thing just starts to drag out. And then now a farmer is going to, a grower is going to, submit a bid and offer and have to wait 4 weeks to learn if the transfer actually happened, right? And in the meantime, having to make decisions on farm, not knowing if they got the water.
Yeah. Clarification, and so then we go to this middle thing there is a fee associated, even if you're doing things within yourself, then, is that what I'm hearing?
That's a whole nother, that's something we need to discuss. Are there fees? I mean,
And
that works.
that's a whole nother, back to your first question on, can you just move it around yourself and not have to involve that at all?
Right, well, that was the thing, I
I
just heard the term fees come up, because of a delay, and it was like trigger point,
I think that was, I think Valerie, you flagged that in one of your documents is fees and we flagged it as the committee needs to discuss. And I think if the committee needs to discuss it and ultimately the GSAs need to evaluate, are there fees necessary to cover expenses? Now, we're all here serving at the pleasure of our GSAs and our growers. So
and again, as a point of clarification, what I was referring to is the money that the buyer pays the seller. Fees hasn't come up in my conversation. They do come up in the first document we're going to look at.
I've used that word too many times. I know it's a bad word. Fees, Prop 218, taxes, assessments.
Okay, that's the one you want to look at, Matthew?
Yeah, yep. And so you'll notice so this is the mid-kaweah water market pilot rules. So in the accompanying resolution would be how the GSA adopts a set of rules like this. And then in the accompanying participation agreement, individual water users would voluntarily agree to be bound by these rules, right? They're allowed to engage in these market transactions if they agree. So you'll notice that the participation agreement and the resolution tie directly to this document. You'll also notice that this is a lot like, this just lays out the elements of how the structure, operating mechanisms, rules that we've been discussing in the committee now for several months. So for example, program period is this water year, which ends September 30th. The unit traded, this is actually just like the slides that we've been looking at and discussing in the committee. You see here, temporary one-time transfer of up to 10 inches per acre during the program period, right? So this embodies that rule that each grower will be able to sell no more than 10 inches times the number of acres that the person has. Some of this is you can go down through here. And as you see on the right, there are some comments here about related to the transfer bucket that we showed. So some of those details, the mechanics of that still need to be worked out for all three GSAs. One thing here that's worth noting, so it says right here, enrollment fee. And so this is actually something that shows up in this document just because it shows up in other water markets rules and regulations, right? So some of these is that I have been looking at and Valerie has been looking at reference documents in other water markets. And so this is just copied over. Aaron said, I think this is a good idea, but we need to discuss with the committee. I am author in this case. My computer didn't make a record of my name. So anytime you see author, that's me commenting. And my actual recommendation was that you don't want enrollment fees to be a barrier to participation in the first year. You don't want someone who is thinking about participating in this new thing that they're not familiar with, and they say, oh, I'm not going to because there's an enrollment fee, right? You really want as much participation early. You want as many people learning as possible. And so there may be administrative fees associated with running a water market pilot, but my recommendation would be that you know, if this is a management tool, that the GSAs support that, and my assumption actually was that there may even be funding in the Water Smart grant that we're all operating under, which can cover those. So this is where enrollment fee comes up. So any comments or questions about that?
I would say from the GSA perspective, because we're so invested in the water dashboard, those fees are currently being covered. There's no need there. And I think the only exposure that the GSAs would have or the landowners would have is the recommendation that we go with a third-party administrator, which I think is a great idea, will come, like Matthew said, and we'll have to make sure we address those.
Is the dashboard going to be different whether or not you're in the market? Or is it going to have the same screen for all users?
It will have the same, we envision it will have all the same screen, different rules or code in the background.
Right.
So the way the dashboard's being developed is there's 3 sets of code. Each GSA has a set of code because the rules are so different. So the complicated nature is when we want to do something collectively, you have to adjust all 3 codes.
Right.
Then they have to work. So it could work for East and Greater because they have more similar rules, but the MIDS code will not work if we were to develop a water marketing strategy. Now, if we use a third party in this transfer bucket, that solved the problem because you just click this button and you're in the water market window. You're actually in another app.
Right. Right. So the physical act of actually enrolling is, you see the water available for transfer, and you can put it into a transfer bucket, hit the button, and then the third-party app comes up.
Correct.
And you're actually in it.
So I don't think there's any
Everybody's
really
doing it.
enrollment. It's just once you want to move the water. Now,
You may have an application button that comes
Yeah.
up, like if you want to transfer and you haven't applied yet to be a participant, you might want
Yeah.
to put like a little,
yeah,
you know, here's the application.
yeah,
Because like Matt was saying, it binds you to the rules.
yeah, and yeah, I think you probably should. And then that'll get more buy-in into the water dashboard.
Yeah.
I also think that the participation agreement and the agreement to be bound by the rules, I think Valerie will echo, is also an important step in terms of mitigating or moderating the issue of water rights and these transfers, right? Because there's some really important disclaimers in the participation agreement related to an individual's water rights.
Right, and if you're just on the dashboard managing those, then you probably don't need those. But if you're going to trade, we obviously want that, you know, the disclaimers of if you're going to trade, and part of the market is knowing that we're going to leave some of the rules, the rigidity of the rules behind.
Yeah, so I think the signing a participation agreement is a prerequisite for engaging in that market activity.
But not the dashboard, right?
Correct, not the
Yeah.
dashboard, right? Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
There are going to be separate requirements to sign on water dashboard.
So here, this also references a participant and participants authorized representatives. So the idea here is that it's not just the owner, it's anyone that is authorized to do the water accounting, right? To use the water dashboard is also agreeing to be bound by those rules. And then there's a series of eligibility requirements. What we discussed in the committee was simply that you have to be in compliance with all existing agency rules and regulations. Go ahead and start scrolling down. You see here, commencement of participation. None of this is super, I don't think, controversial. There are some basic outlines here of trading rules. How a person, so it says here that auctions are conducted in the first 3 months and last 3 months of the water year. Obviously, the first 3 months have come and gone, so we would really be talking about the last 3 months of the water year. And then there's some actual basics here about how you submit an offer, what you submit. What is it, the information that the market needs in order to facilitate a transfer. And again, all of this is just a draft. So this is how it works in many water markets, but we encourage you to read through this, think about the mechanics, and then let us know if you have any comments or questions about any element of that. You can keep going down. So for example, an expiration date, right? If someone submits a bid or offer, right? We're doing auctions monthly, so 21 days probably isn't the right amount expiration date because it might expire before the next auction. But be thinking about the mechanics of how that information is offered and whether or not a bid or offer should live on beyond the next auction. You can keep going down. You'll read Aaron's comments about the transfer bucket and then matching. This is just one draft set of matching rules, which you're welcome to read and respond to, and then clearing and settlement. So we really want you to spend some time reading this, and then telling us what your reaction is. If you can think of better ways that you'd like to see things work, and record all of those comments here. And then it lays out what's the information that the exchange would report, not just the transfer of allocation, but also price and quantity information. And then it starts to talk about the limitations on trade. Currently, this particular one, limitations on trade, needs more specificity. And so recall that we're waiting on the engineering team to learn the designation of disadvantaged communities, or the identification of disadvantaged communities, the definition of minimum thresholds, and then the specific geographic boundaries. And so once all of that information and has been delivered, we'll then really need to write up a tighter description of how these limitations on trade and the triggers is going to work. Obviously, this is also an area where each of the 3 GSAs might have a slightly different set of rules and regulations because there are GSA specific limitations on trade. And so we're actually in the end going to need 3 versions of this section to reflect the differences in the allocation systems and those limitations. And so that will be forthcoming, but feel free to offer your suggestions about how to embody that information. And then there's a process for a description of how to handle market-related disputes, et cetera. Here, there is actually the suggestion of a review committee. And so our vision here is that if you're going to, whether it's the dashboard or someone else that's operating the water accounting dashboard team or someone else operating an exchange platform, you need oversight from the GSAs. And so we propose a review committee that would, at least in the initial suggestion, consist of each of the GSA directors and then perhaps representatives of water users. That would be a formal committee that can be called upon to settle disputes, handle any questions, or help resolve any confusion resulting from the application of the rules. And so read, and then monitoring and investigation, you can read through this. Some of this is, again, just boilerplate that's borrowed from other similar rules and regulations. So let us know what you think of all of that. So Valerie, is there anything else you would like to communicate to the committee about this document in general or particular provisions?
I think you've already said this, but just that it's draft and, it will benefit from people tearing it up. Don't feel restricted, and some of the concepts, like you said, are from other applications. And I mean, especially like fees and how much of the not only the enrollment fee, but the fee on the backside of the transfer. And I question all of that. I don't know if we should do those. That seems market prohibitive to me. The sanctions worries me a little bit too. I mean, we don't want people to come into this thinking that they're going to get in more trouble. Maybe we develop those as, you know, frankly, after the market, after the pilot component. So yeah, just don't feel shy in saying, why are we doing this? Or this seems like an idea we could add later, or it seems like this is, you know, take this off or on. So those are my only thoughts.
Great. Aaron, you've spent quite a bit of time with it. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I encourage you to just read this document here, and it's very readable from an engineering standpoint. I love all the bullets, and it's digestible. And at 5 pages, to get a water marketing strategy within 5 pages was it's a good document, great document.
Yeah.
But yeah, feel free to.
Before we're done, the trading restrictions might be another 5 pages. So keep that in mind too.
No, everybody only gets, you're only gonna have one more sheet of paper.
So before we move on to any other document, any initial comments or questions?
Anybody online? Nobody in the chat?
Chat room.
I like the idea of this, what was it, the review committee? I just question whether or not it's wise to put the GSA managers on that, because they're gonna be so overburdened starting out. This is a chance to get, more people involved. And I think it would be very wise to punt on that issue, to come up with a different group of people.
I think they get hammered sometimes.
Well, and
Yeah,
That's why I didn't want to. You said it.
you can do a 3-person committee that gets appointed, and you start out with a 1, 2, and a 3-year term. So you rotate one person off every year.
It doesn't work.
Huh? What's
Well, it
that?
depends on if you want a
three-
policy, if
Yeah.
you want like the policy guys
Because
coming
you
in from a
get
high
people
level,
leaving.
or if you want technical people who really understand the mechanics. And that's another thing that's weird about this review committee. Like what's their job? I thought about it a little bit, and I fully agree that the GMs are overburdened. They have to interface on so many other things. But I thought about putting policy people on there, and frankly, I thought that was a bad idea too. Just because I think my perspective is policy people get briefed on things and they get to make very difficult but high level decisions. And I think some of this review committee, they might have to be unpacking some stuff. So I don't know what kind of, technical specialists that
I think it's
would be good, but
I think it's a subset of this committee, or it's this committee.
yeah, I like the idea of stakeholders who've been involved in the process of designing the thing and understood what the intention was. The other thing too that we should keep in mind is that we're talking about a pilot. And so review committee, it may be, this is really a group that's just going to help evaluate, hey, is it doing what we thought it was going to do, right? Do we need to consider a modification of the rules, because, if there's I
Matthew, now I get a better picture. It is this committee.
Yeah.
Right, because it represents all beneficial users.
Yep.
It represents technical, some policy folks.
Yep.
And it geographically represents the whole subbase.
yeah, thinking about how and when to convene the group is probably missing from this document too.
Yeah, maybe at most quarterly, at a minimum once a year.
Well, I was actually thinking, yeah, so once a year plus ad hoc, right? If there's a dispute, right? Because the other one you're worried about is that someone puts water up for sale, it gets matched and it's sold, and then they say, no, I need that water after all, sorry. I didn't mean to transfer it, right? And so you need somebody who will say, no, you submitted an offer, it was active, it was transferred, the transfer was approved by the GSA, right? So at the end, you need someone to, so there's an evaluation process, and then there's a dispute resolution function. And I don't know that there will ever be disputes. Certainly the water markets that I've been involved in have never had disputes of that nature, but
Do you think in this thing, when you go into that middle site, when when your disclaimers and everything else, that you also agree to arbitration that's going to be done by this group? And not so that they're not taking it on to courts, into courts.
In your participation agreement, it has arbitration requirements.
Okay. I didn't see it.
Yeah, we haven't gotten in.
Okay,
It's down here, and it's
okay. Dispute resolution.
But when
Additional
Joe's
5
talking about
pages,
when you
right?
sign the participation
Sorry, I
agreement.
said it. What's that?
No, when Joe said you acknowledge as a user in the market, in the participation agreement, is you're agreeing to arbitration under the,
well,
normal-
actually it says you're agreeing to let the review committee evaluate it first. And then if you don't
And
like
then
their decision, you're agreeing to arbitration.
Did you consider the role of the GSA board of directors in this, or is there a role?
That's interesting. That's a good question.
That's what I was talking about, the policy people. And my sense is that this is way too in the weeds for that policy role. I mean, that's just how I think of policy boards. They need to come in, make high level decisions after being briefed. And then of course they take the hit and get elected or not. And whereas this is really unpacking, the really intricate rules. And I think that would be kind of a mismatch in my head. Yeah, so maybe this group is the right technical in the weeds group.
And again, if you're meeting once a year and then on call for issues, maybe you have, in all reality, you're really not looking at an issue. Well, you could have an issue in the first year.
You may. And it might, and like Matt was saying, it may be more of a, we put this rule in and it really didn't work or it wasn't effective. It's kind of a.
They would probably handle that
Post hoc.
accounting issue. Like when you do an audit, this committee oversees that audit, says, okay, these things didn't work and we need to revise the rules. And again, so here's another complicating part is so the concept is this committee is putting in a water marketing strategy, but ultimately through resolution, the board is authorizing the program.
Right.
So at the end of the day, this committee could evaluate the issues, but ultimately the arbitrator ahead of arbitration is the GSA board.
So it could be that this committee makes a recommendation to the GSA board if the issue needs a GSA board action, right?
Because we're the administrator of the GSA will be the administrator of the water market. So
Right.
that
You mean if
board-
someone has an issue and they want to sue someone, who do they file that against in the end? Is that really your question?
Well, the GSAs would have to accept that they would be delegating the authority to this committee to oversee issues and audits and things like that.
Right. Yes, that would be in the resolution, I think.
Okay, we can clean it up in the
Yeah.
resolution.
Yep. We should issue this group matching sweatshirts. Some sort of collaborative outfit.
Yeti beer cups.
Is there another document you want me to open, Matthew?
You might as well just we won't talk about much, but just very slowly scan through. They can at least see subject headings in the participation agreement.
Don't get in the
So like any agreement, it'll have recitals. It'll identify who the person is that's entering into the agreement, and then what it is that's agreed to. And so there is some important language here about water rights and compliance with agency regulations. You can just keep going down. And then, basically boilerplate with a reference there to the dispute resolution process, agreeing to first submit to the review committee, and if unsatisfied with the review committee's recommendation, then seeking arbitration.
And really the rest of the language, is obviously intended to significantly limit the breadth of those potential disagreements anyway, right? I mean,
Yep.
it says, you're going to indemnify us. You also can't sue us about water rights. So, I mean, the number of things that you could bring, even in a dispute resolution or arbitration or litigation afterwards, are
Yep.
significantly narrowed by this language,
Yeah.
purposefully.
What, I'm Joe Grower, and I go onto the site there and it says I have this much water that I can market.
Yep.
So I choose to market it. And lo and behold, there's a true up, or there was an error or something in there. And now I'm upside down. I have this big fee, what I shouldn't have. How is that, a dispute like that handled? And by whom?
I
In
think
other
it,
words, if the person did a screenshot of their screen and said, this is what I had, this is the date, this is everything.
right.
I made this transfer, everything was good. And 2 months later, there was a mistake in there and you overpumped, or you owe this much money.
Right. I
How
think
is that
there's,
resolved?
I think there's disclaiming language that you're responsible for knowing, even with the lag, you're knowing your authority, you can't, and you shouldn't oversell. I think so I think there is some indemnification language that says basically like, buyer beware, it's kind of on you. But I think the reality of that is that if you really do make a mistake and you're not, trying to work the system or clearly selling stuff that you don't think, and I think basically it goes to the review committee and then it goes to your GSA and you say, hey, listen, don't put in fees that charge me X amount of water. Now, if you sold that and you got some money back, my sense is that would all have to be taken into consideration. But if you oversold water and it really truly wasn't fair, I mean, I think the review committee would look at it. And I think the
What I'm saying
GSA.
is that it was indicated that it was there.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's on the last go around, but there was an error, because
Right.
I think we need to front end this thing, that make sure that people understand that what you see right now on the board may not necessarily be what you have next month because of the true up
30
that
day.
occurs.
Right. I think that's what she's saying, is that issue is a buyer beware. It's kind of, you need to be conscientious of that. But there is the instance
Buyer
where
or seller.
Seller
beware. But there is a situation where there's a glitch in the water dashboard.
Mhm. That's what I'm
And,
getting at.
and in that, case, I think what Valerie is saying is that's a very clear and easy take to the review committee. Review
Right.
committee probably finds and tells the board, GSA board, hey, this was not his mistake. This was your mistake. You're gonna have to write it off.
Waive the fees, right? Yeah.
Right. But I do think, and I don't know where it is in here, but I think there is or should be language in there that says, in the end, you're responsible for really knowing your budget, whether that's exactly correct or up to date on the dashboard or not. I mean, I get it that if you're selling the dashboard if I were the end user and I went to the dashboard, I would have a really hard time questioning that or not thinking that was right. So I would rely on the dashboard quite a bit. So, I mean, if we have a 30-day lag and we think that that's gonna turn into dashboard information being chronically incorrect, I think we really do have to think about that. And we would have to either be very explicit that it's a checkpoint, but that you shouldn't be relying on the dashboard, or if the dashboard's gonna be updated enough, then you don't need those kind of disclaimers as much.
I can already see Scott's got a program in there. I want to move I want to move 100 acre feet. And it goes back and it says, okay, well, you have 100 acre feet today, but based on your historical pumping, you might need to deduct another 25 acre feet because in the month of June, you're gonna ET 25 acre feet, and that's not showing up on your water dashboard.
Well, actually, Aaron, I think it's actually, it actually needs to say 30 days ago, you had 100 acre feet. You no longer have 100 acre feet.
Yeah, you no longer have it.
But let me ask you this now, what about the possibility or plausibility of having people after it's, okay, the water year's behind us, it's been 30 days. And you have 30 days to, in other words, you've got the new report that you can, at that point, market water to somebody else, or do you see what I'm saying?
The
Yeah, we
true
talked
up.
about that.
True.
That's an outstanding question that this committee needs to make a recommendation on.
Pardon, do you want to have that available for folks?
True.
Everybody's doing it. Right. We're doing it right now. It's a little late, but.
Sound like my 13-year-old, Aaron. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. No.
Not often said about farmers.
Same thing.
At least I'm going right in the age group. I'm going-
Anything on the resolution you want to focus
I
on,
think it would
Matthew?
be interesting to see if it's used though, right? You have that option available and if people use it or if they don't. On the trip.
It's all those guys that are not paying attention, then look at the radar dashboard.
Right. It would be interesting to see if it was.
To have some, just make sure we have the interaction with the GSAs on transfers that are happening outside of this. So their time in putting the information into the dashboard, because if they've pulled water out that's sold outside of the market, that the dashboard's up to date before someone goes in there and then tries to sell the same bucket.
Yep.
This is probably gonna become the default. term for
Change it
operation of the project.
Groundwater credit to allocation.
Still be adding to this as we go on.
So obviously, in this discussion today, we've come up with a number of open questions. And so one of the things we'll do in the February meeting, like this 30-day true up, we just heard, what's the effect of a non-market transferred on the dashboard quantities? Are they updated sufficiently quickly that someone can't sell water they already transferred to someone else, right? So I have a list of about 15 questions here on a piece of paper, and we can start the February meeting with those questions and really try and drill down.
Matthew, are those in the comment sections on these documents or not?
No, I've been
these
writing down, I have been writing down questions as everyone has been talking. And so I'll put those together in a list, and we can even distribute that in advance of the February meeting. The CVP place of use restriction, right? We need to think about that, right? Where is that? Who is going to be impacted by that, and how does that affect the?
I think that's an engineering exercise. I need a GIS map with all the territories not under the CVP place of use.
Yeah.
Which I'd love to have that map anyway.
Yeah, you have that map.
You can't pump in those areas.
Yeah, because
Well, I mean,
they're not. Yeah.
And it'll have to also identify the locations of the wells that are being protected.
The Bureau has a new banking operation policy, but it is not very helpful.
So any comments or questions from the group on what you've seen today and what you've talked about, or what you've seen, what you've shown you and we have been talking about?
Maybe it won't happen. I guess the concern I have when you start having lots of people editing these documents, it
Yeah.
gets really hard to read after a while. The comments are fine.
Yeah.
And maybe it won't be an issue, but you might, if you get a half dozen people deleting and inserting language, you might consider, a cleaned up draft to look at some
Yeah.
point.
You bet. Yeah.
But maybe nobody will get in there until the day before.
The rainbow.
Well, even the comments, right? When it has to start showing the comments in 2-point font to get them all on the screen, that'll be a problem too.
Well, we will.
This is really good. I'm glad you have that up now. Thank you.
So we do have a logistics issue. Chuck was indicating that Tuesdays are difficult. We were originally on Wednesdays. We could go back to Wednesdays. It's the fourth Wednesday of every month.
Did you go to the third Tuesday?
Oh, I'm sorry, third Wednesday.
Yeah, okay. Because you're third Tuesday now.
Mhm.
Okay. I just saw that on that message. I didn't realize that before on the date, so I apologize for that.
Third Wednesdays work for me. Matthew
So-
and Craig.
So the third Wednesday would be the 15th. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be the 15th. Go, last Wednesday, it'd be the 22nd.
I know, so I feel like we.
Yeah, if you would do that, I'd appreciate it.
You want to do the, switch to the third? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Adriel, I think you own that invitation.
I do. To confirm, we're going with the third and not the fourth Wednesday, right?
Yes.
Third Wednesday.
Same time?
Yeah. Lunch at noon, meeting at 12:30.
Got it.
Sweatshirt distribution.
Sweatshirts,
I want to
yeah. Goodie bags and swag bags.
sweat.
Anything else we need to cover? That was it?
I'm gonna cancel the rest of the invites in this series. Everybody be lookout for a new one.
Excellent. Thank you, Kendra.
All right. If there's anything else, I think we're done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.